The conference room smelled like polished wood and old money. The long mahogany table had been wiped so many times over the years that it reflected the chandelier above like still water. Lawyers sat on one side with their folders neatly stacked, pens aligned as if this were just another routine meeting. But for my family, this wasn't routine. This was Judgment Day. Inheritance meetings always sound formal, but in reality, they're just polite disguises for greed. My mother sat beside my father at the head of the table, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, composed, the way she always did when she wanted the world to believe our family was perfect. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight, fingers tapping softly against the armrest of his chair. That tapping told me everything. He was nervous, even if he would never admit it. Across from me sat my brother Eric, relaxed, smug, practically glowing. He leaned back in his chair like a man who already knew the ending of the story. His tailored suit hugged him perfectly, and the gold watch on his wrist caught the light every time he moved his hand. Eric loved symbols of success. He wore them like armor. Then there was me. Teagan. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, hands folded, expression neutral, no designer suit, no flashy jewelry, just a simple navy dress and a calm smile that never quite reached my eyes. To anyone watching, I probably looked like the least important person in the room, which is exactly how my family had always seen me. The lawyer cleared his throat. As you all know, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore have requested this meeting to clarify certain aspects of their estate planning. Estate planning, a polite phrase for dividing up the spoils. My mother nodded. We thought it was best to be transparent. No confusion later. Eric chuckled softly. Transparency is good, he said, glancing at me for just a second before looking away. Especially when there's a lot at stake. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I'd learned long ago that silence made people underestimate you, and underestimation is a powerful advantage. The lawyer began listing assets. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, trust funds. Then he paused, and finally, he said, adjusting his glasses, the 5 rental properties located in New York City. Eric's posture changed instantly. He leaned forward now, elbows on the table, fingers interlocked. This was his moment. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I already knew what was coming. Mom and Dad decided. Eric said suddenly, cutting the lawyer off, to give all 5 rental houses to me. He said it confidently, casually, as if this had already been signed, sealed, and delivered. Then he turned toward me, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Teagan, too bad. You're getting nothing. For half a second, the room was silent. Then laughter, not cruel laughter, not exactly, more like approving amusement. Smiles spread across faces. Even my aunt, sitting quietly near the door, nodded as if this outcome made perfect sense. Eric's always been the responsible one. Someone said, he understands real estate. Another chimed in, it's only logical. My mother added gently, not looking at me, logical. That word had been used against me my entire life. I looked at my father. He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, as if confirming a decision already made. The cheering started then. Light applause, encouraging murmurs. Eric basked in it, and me, I smiled, not a tight smile, not a bitter one. A calm, genuine smile. I stood up slowly, the legs of my chair scraping softly against the floor. Every sound in the room seemed louder now. Every eye turned toward me, curiosity flickering across faces. I tilted my head slightly and said, Dad. My voice was steady, warm. You really don't know, do you? The tapping stopped. My father froze. His eyes finally met mine, and in that moment I saw something I had never seen before. Fear, it flashed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. But I didn't. I knew him too well. What are you talking about? He asked. His voice suddenly hoarse. Eric scoffed. Here we go, he muttered. Teagan, don't do this. I ignored him. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. Nothing dramatic. No slamming it on the table. I simply placed it in front of my father and slid it toward him. You might want to look at that, I said softly. My mother frowned. Teagan, this isn't appropriate. It's very appropriate. I replied, never breaking eye contact with my father. The lawyer leaned forward. What is this document? My father's hands trembled as he opened the folder. The room went quiet again. The color drained from his face. It was as if his heart had dropped straight through the floor. Eric noticed first. "What is it?" he demanded. "Dad?" My father didn't answer. He just stared at the page, eyes wide, lips parted, breath shallow. "What is it?" Eric repeated, louder now. I sat back down slowly. "That," I said calmly, "is the deed transfer." Eric laughed sharply. "You're bluffing." "I don't bluff," I replied. The lawyer stood abruptly. "May I see that?" My father handed over the document like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The lawyer's eyes scanned the page. Then he frowned. Then he read it again. "This," he murmured, "this indicates that the 5 New York rental properties were transferred." Eric slammed his hand on the table. "Transferred to who?" The lawyer looked up at me. "To MS. Teagan Whitmore." The room exploded. "What?" Eric shouted, leaping to his feet. "That's impossible." My mother stood too, shaking her head. "No, no, this must be a mistake." "It's not," I said quietly. Eric turned on me, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. "You stole them." "I didn't steal anything," I replied. "They were given to me legally 3 years ago." My father finally found his voice. You said you were helping with paperwork." "I was," I said. "You asked me to manage some administrative issues when your health declined. You trusted me." My mother whispered, "Teagan." "You signed everything," I continued gently. "Multiple times, with witnesses, with legal counsel." Eric screamed, actually screamed. "This is a lie. You manipulated him." The lawyer shook his head slowly. "The documents are valid, filed, recorded." Eric turned toward my father. "Tell her she's lying." My father sank back into his chair, his shoulders collapsing. I didn't read carefully. He whispered, "I thought it was temporary." I leaned forward now. "No," I said softly. "You thought I wasn't smart enough to do something permanent." Silence, the kind of silence that cracks foundations. Eric paced the room like a trapped animal. "Why?" he snapped at me. "Why would you do this?" I met his eyes. "Because when I asked for help," I said, "you laughed. When I worked for free managing those properties, you called me useful but replaceable. When Mom said inheritance was about fairness, you said fairness was for losers." My voice never rose. "And because," I added, "you all forgot something very important." They waited. I smiled again. "The houses were never really yours to give." Eric stared at me, his chest heaving. "What does that mean?" he asked. I took a slow breath. "That," I said, "is a story you're finally ready to hear." Eric's scream echoed in the conference room long after the words left his mouth. It wasn't just anger in that sound. It was disbelief, humiliation, and the sharp panic of a man watching his future evaporate in real time. "You planned this?" he shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "You've been plotting behind our backs." I didn't flinch. Planning implies secrecy. This wasn't secrecy. This was patience. "I warned you," I said calmly, many times. My mother pressed her hand to her chest, breathing unevenly. "Teagan, why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her then, really looked at her. The same woman who had once told me, when I was 17 and working 2 jobs, that struggling builds character, but only when it was me struggling. "Would you have listened?" I asked softly. She didn't answer. The lawyer cleared his throat again, trying to restore order. "Perhaps we should all sit down." Eric refused. He kept pacing, running his hands through his hair like he was trying to tear the truth out of his own head. "This can't stand," he snapped. "We can contest this, right, Dad?" My father didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the table, as if staring hard enough might erase the past 3 years. "You transferred ownership to Teagan," the lawyer said carefully. "The documents show clear intent." Intent. Eric laughed bitterly. He was sick, confused. I was not confused. My father said suddenly, his voice breaking through the noise like fragile glass. Everyone froze. He lifted his head slowly, shame etched into every line of his face. "I knew what I was signing," he admitted. "I just didn't think she'd use it, as if protecting myself was exploitation. As if I'd keep playing the invisible daughter forever." I said quietly. Eric spun toward him. You gave her everything. No, I corrected. You gave it to me. The room fell silent again. I stood up once more, not to dominate the room, but to steady myself. This wasn't easy. It never had been. It just looked easy from the outside. You asked me to manage the rentals. I said, turning to everyone now. You said Eric was too busy expanding his brand. You said I was organized, reliable, cheap. Eric scoffed. You were paid? Barely, I replied. And when tenants called at 2 a.m. about broken heaters, when lawsuits threatened because of neglected repairs, when property taxes were overdue. I paused. Who handled that? No one answered. I refinanced those properties. I continued. I negotiated settlements. I prevented foreclosures you didn't even know were coming. My mother's eyes widened. Foreclosures. Yes, I said, plural. My father's shoulders slumped further. Eric stopped pacing. What do you mean foreclosures? He asked, his voice suddenly quieter. The houses were bleeding money. I said mismanagement, deferred maintenance, inflated confidence. Eric shook his head. That's not true. The income statements were cosmetic. I cut in. Numbers dressed up to impress investors who never looked too closely. The lawyer nodded slowly. That aligns with what I'm seeing here. Eric's jaw clenched. So you fix things, that doesn't mean you get to steal them. I didn't steal them. I repeated, I saved them. Then I looked directly at my father, and you knew, I said. You knew Eric didn't want responsibility. He wanted credit. My father swallowed hard. You came to me, I said, because you were scared. You said you didn't trust him to protect what you'd built. Eric laughed hollowly. You're rewriting history. No, my father whispered, she's not. That broke something in Eric. You chose her, he shouted. After everything I did for this family. I finally turned fully toward him. What did you do? I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. I worked. He snapped eventually. I represented the family. You represented yourself, I replied. You spent more time posting about success than maintaining it. Eric's fists clenched. You think you're better than me now? No, I said. I think I'm done being beneath you. The lawyer raised a hand. There's another matter. Everyone looked at him. The transfer wasn't just ownership, he said carefully. MS Whitmore also holds controlling authority over any future sale or redistribution. Eric's eyes widened. What? He demanded. I met his gaze calmly. That means, I said, you can't force me to give anything back. My mother sank into her chair. You've destroyed this family, she whispered. I shook my head slowly. This family destroyed itself. I just stopped pretending not to see it. Eric leaned toward me, his voice low and venomous. You think this ends here? I smiled faintly. No. I said, I know it doesn't. The meeting dissolved shortly after that. The lawyers packed up quietly. My parents left without another word. Eric stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shudder. I stayed seated for a moment after everyone was gone, not triumphant. Just, relieved, outside, the city hummed like nothing extraordinary had happened. Cars honked. People laughed. Somewhere, life continued. My phone buzzed. A text from Eric. You think you won. This isn't over. I typed back only 4 words. It already is, because what he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the houses were only the beginning. There were accounts Eric had never seen, contracts signed in my name, and a final clause my father had never bothered to read, one that would make screaming seem merciful. Eric didn't speak to me for 3 weeks, not a text, not a call, not even an angry voicemail. For someone who thrived on control, silence was his last weapon. He thought if he ignored me long enough, I'd grow nervous, guilty, maybe even desperate enough to compromise. Instead, I got busy. The first thing I did was something no one in my family had ever bothered with. I read everything. Every contract, every lease, every clause my father had signed over decades of ownership. Not skimming, not assuming, reading. That's how I found it. Buried deep in the original partnership agreement from 26 years ago, written in language so dull it practically begged to be overlooked, was a clause that changed everything. It stated that if one managing partner failed to meet fiduciary responsibilities, specifically maintenance, tax compliance, and tenant safety, the secondary partner had the right to assume full control. That secondary partner was my mother. and when her health declined, she had quietly transferred that position to me. No announcement, no family meeting, just a signature. Eric had never even known the partnership existed. I scheduled a meeting with the firm's senior attorney, not the junior associate who'd attended the inheritance meeting. I wanted experience, I wanted caution, I wanted someone who understood consequences. He adjusted his glasses as he read through the documents, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "Your brother is exposed." He said finally, "How badly?" I asked, severely. He replied, "Negligence, misrepresentation, potential fraud if tenants pursue action." I nodded. "I had expected that, and me," I asked. He looked at me carefully. "You've been operating within your authority. You corrected violations. You stabilized finances. From a legal standpoint, you're the reason those properties are still standing. Good." 2 days later, Eric called, "Meet me." He said, "No greeting, no pretense tonight." I agreed. The restaurant he chose was expensive and loud, the kind of place where conversations dissolved into background noise. He sat at the bar, drink already half empty, his confidence visibly eroded but not gone. "You embarrassed me," he said as soon as I sat down. "You did that yourself," I replied. He snorted. "You think people don't talk. They're saying you tricked Dad." "People talk because you let them," I said. I stayed quiet for years. It didn't protect me. He leaned closer. "What do you want?" I studied him for a moment, not the version he presented to the world, but the boy underneath, the one who'd always needed applause. "I want peace," I said, "and distance." He laughed. "You want control." "I already have it." That shut him up. "I'll sue." He said after a moment, "I'll drag this through court until you beg." "You can try," I replied. "But discovery will ruin you." His jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." I reached into my bag and slid my phone across the bar. The screen showed a scanned inspection report from 4 years earlier, one he'd ignored. "Mold, structural damage, safety violations." He stared at it. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "You forwarded it to me." I said, "You asked me to handle it quietly." His face drained of color. "Teagan." He said slowly, "We're family." I almost laughed. "You only remember that when you're losing." I said, "I stood to leave, wait." He said, "Let's make a deal." I turned back. "There is no deal." He grabbed my wrist hard. I looked down at his hand, then back at his face. "Let go," I said quietly. He did. That night, I sent notices to all tenants introducing myself as the sole managing authority. I outlined improvements, timelines, and direct contact channels. No intermediaries. No excuses. The response was immediate. Thank you emails, relief, stories I'd never heard because no one had bothered to listen before. One message stood out. A woman named Clara wrote about a fire hazard Eric had dismissed as minor. She attached photos. Dates, emails, I forwarded everything to my attorney. "Proceed," he replied. The next morning, Eric showed up at my office, unannounced. He looked exhausted, wrinkled suit, dark circles under his eyes. "You're ruining me," he said. "You ruined yourself," I replied. He slammed his palms on my desk. "You always hated me." I shook my head. "I wanted your respect. I settled for your absence." He laughed bitterly. "You think Dad knew this would happen?" "Yes," I said. "That's why he signed." Eric froze. "What?" "He was afraid." I continued, "Not of you failing, but of you never learning." Eric sank into the chair across from me. "Fix this," he said weakly. I leaned forward. "I am?" Security escorted him out shortly after. That evening, my mother called. Her voice was small. "Your father had a mild heart episode." I closed my eyes. "Is he okay? He's stable," she said, "but he keeps asking for you." I went to the hospital that night. The room smelled like antiseptic and regret. My father looked smaller in the bed, wires tracing his chest like a map of consequences. "I didn't protect you," he whispered when he saw me. "No." I said gently, "You taught me." Tears slid down his cheeks. "I didn't know Eric would become this," he said. "You knew." I replied softly, "You just hoped he wouldn't." He reached for my hand. "Promise me something." "What?" "Don't become like him." I squeezed his hand. "I won't." Outside the room, I checked my phone. A notification from my attorney. We're ready to file. I exhaled slowly. The final clause was about to surface. And when it did, Eric wouldn't just lose property. He'd lose the story he'd built his life on. The filing went through on a Thursday morning. I remember because Thursdays used to mean family dinners. Loud conversations, forced laughter, Eric at the center of everything, telling stories where he was always the hero. I hadn't been invited to those dinners in years, not officially. I was just busy, according to my mother. Or working again, according to Eric, as if effort were a flaw. Now Thursdays meant something else, accountability. By noon, Eric's phone was ringing nonstop. I knew because his assistant, former assistant technically, called me in a panic. "He's locked himself in his office," she said. "He's yelling at everyone. He says this is your fault." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones after years of being unseen. The lawsuit wasn't dramatic, no headlines, no courtroom theatrics, just facts laid out methodically. Negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation, documented warnings ignored. Pages and pages of proof Eric himself had provided over the years without realizing it. Discovery was merciless. Banks froze lines of credit. Partners backed away quietly. Invitations stopped coming. The world Eric had curated so carefully, panels, conferences, glossy photos, began to collapse under the weight of truth. He tried calling again. I didn't answer. Instead, I received a call from my mother. "They're saying your brother might lose everything," she whispered as if the walls were listening. "He already lost what mattered," I said. She paused. "He's still your brother." I closed my eyes, and I was still your daughter. Silence. Then softer, I didn't see it. "No," I replied, "you chose not to." That was the difference. The next time I saw Eric was at mediation. He looked smaller somehow, less polished. His confidence had thinned to something brittle and sharp. He didn't look at me when I walked in. His lawyer spoke first, apologies, regret, offers to settle. I listened. When it was my turn, I spoke calmly. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want resolution." Eric finally looked up. Hope flickered in his eyes. "I want full acknowledgement of wrongdoing," I continued. "Public correction of false statements, and removal of your name from all current and future management roles." His lawyer stiffened. Eric's hope vanished. "You're stripping me of everything," he snapped. "No," I said. "I'm stripping you of authority you abused." He leaned forward, desperation seeping through the cracks. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," I replied, "I do." The agreement was signed 3 hours later. When we stood to leave, Eric stopped me. "You think you're better than me now?" he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. "I think I'm finally free of you." That night, I walked through one of the New York buildings alone. The hallways were clean, the lights worked. Heat hummed softly through the vents. A tenant waved at me, smiling. "Thanks for fixing the stairs," she said. "My mother can finally visit." I nodded, throat tight. This was the part no one applauded, the part that didn't look impressive on social media. But it mattered. A week later, my father passed peacefully in his sleep. No dramatic final words, no last-minute confessions. Just silence. At the funeral, Eric stood far away from me. He looked hollow, not angry anymore, just empty. When it was over, he approached me cautiously. "He believed in you," he said. "I know," I replied. Eric hesitated. "I don't know who I am without all of this." I studied him. For the first time, I felt no resentment. "That's not my problem," I said gently, "but it is your opportunity." He nodded once and walked away. Months passed, the properties thrived, tenants stayed, repairs were completed, the income stabilized. Not maximized, but balanced, ethical. One afternoon, I received a final letter from Eric's former firm. They were severing ties. I placed it in a drawer and closed it. Power, I'd learned, wasn't about winning loudly. It was about surviving quietly, but the final truth, the one no one saw coming, had yet to surface. Because my father had left one more instruction, and it wasn't for Eric. The letter arrived on a quiet morning, slipped under my office door by a courier who didn't know its weight. It was handwritten. My father's handwriting had always been precise, disciplined. Each letter formed carefully as if mistakes were unacceptable even on paper. Seeing it again felt like a hand reaching out from the past. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee. I stood by the window. I watched the city wake up. People rushing, unaware that a man's final intention was about to reshape my understanding of everything. When I finally unfolded the page, the paper trembled slightly in my hands. Teagan, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say these things out loud. I closed my eyes. I knew what was coming. And still I wasn't ready. I spent years believing strength meant control, that leadership meant being obeyed. I rewarded confidence and punished quiet competence because I mistook noise for ability. That mistake nearly destroyed everything I built, and you were the one who saved it. You didn't fight for approval. You didn't demand recognition. You worked when no one was watching, fixed what others ignored, and protected people who had nothing to offer you in return. That is real power. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. I failed you as a father. I let Eric take space that didn't belong to him because it was easier than confronting him. I let you disappear because I assumed you were strong enough to endure it. That was selfish. The assets were never the inheritance. Responsibility was. That's why I left the final decision to you. Attached to this letter is a directive. Use it only if you believe it is right. If you believe it will bring balance, not bitterness, be better than I was. Dad, my hands were shaking when I reached the last line. Attached to the letter was a single-page legal directive notarized, dated 2 months before his death. It granted me full discretion to restructure the family trust, not redistribute, restructure. Eric still received an inheritance modest, protected, conditional, enough to live, not enough to dominate. But there was a clause. He would receive it only if he completed 5 years of documented, non-executive work under independent supervision. No leadership titles, no public representation, no shortcuts. If he refused, the funds would be redirected into tenant protections and housing safety initiatives. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't revenge. This was correction, Eric called that evening. I got a letter, too, he said quietly. I waited. He left it to you. Eric continued. Didn't he? Yes, I said. Silence stretched between us. I deserve this. He said finally, don't I? I thought about the boy who had always been louder than life, who had confused admiration with worth, who had never learned how to be useful without being praised. You deserve the chance to become someone else, I replied. What you do with it is up to you. Another pause. I don't know how to start over. He admitted, for once. I said gently, neither did I. The difference is, I did it anyway. Weeks passed. Eric accepted the terms. No announcements, no posts, no speeches, just work. I didn't supervise him. I didn't rescue him. I didn't interfere. That was part of the lesson. The properties continued to thrive, not spectacularly. Sustainably, repairs stayed ahead of complaints. Tenants stayed longer. Trust replaced fear. One afternoon, Clara, the tenant who had first written to me, invited me for tea. Her apartment was warm, filled with light and quiet dignity. You changed things. She said simply, no. I replied, I listened. She smiled, that's rarer. At night, when the city settled, I sometimes thought about the inheritance meeting, the cheers, the laughter. Eric's certainty, I remembered my smile, not because I was winning, but because I finally knew something they didn't. The truth doesn't need applause, it only needs time. Months later, I ran into Eric outside one of the buildings. He was carrying tools, sweat on his brow, sleeves rolled up. He looked different, grounded. He nodded at me. The boiler system's outdated. I flagged it. Good, I said. He hesitated. I didn't know how much work this actually was. I met his eyes. Now you do? He nodded again, then walked back inside. I watched him go without triumph, without resentment, just acceptance. That night, I filed the final trust restructuring. I closed the folder, turned off the light, and stood alone in the quiet. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt complete, because the greatest inheritance my parents left behind wasn't property, or money, or control. It was the chance to choose who I would become. And this time I chose myself.